Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our second Mary Talk of the season. My name is Jeremy Vaughn. I am the Associate Director of Alumni Programs and Director of Arts Advancement here at Mary Washington, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Mary Talk. We are excited to host a sizable audience for tonight's presentation, which includes over 600 alumni, students, parents, and friends from across the country and beyond in places like Vancouver, British Columbia, registered for tonight's event. As with past virtual lectures, there will be time after tonight's talk for our guests to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to ask a question by clicking on the Q&A icon below and submitting there, or vote for other submitted questions to help them rise to the top of the list. At this time, I'd like to introduce alumna Katie Nelson Coffey, class of 2008, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Katie?
Thank you, Jeremy. Professors Miriam Liss and Holly Schiffrin are professors of psychological science at the University of Mary Washington. Dr. Liss earned her PhD and MA in clinical psychology at the University of Connecticut after receiving a BA with high honors in psychology from Wesleyan University. She teaches general psychology, personality, abnormal psychology, as well as a freshman seminar on positive psychology and senior research seminars and teams. She is a clinical psychologist and has conducted research on feminism, body image and objectification, parenting, division of labor, work-family balance. And Dr. Liss's honors include the UMW Outstanding Young Faculty, a Member Award, and the Chev Outstanding Faculty Award in 2014, and the Waple Professional Achievement Award in 2020. Dr. Schiffrin received her degree in developmental psychology from the University of Miami in 1998. She teaches courses in child development, developmental research, statistics, and positive psychology. She also received a master's level certificate in parent coaching from the Parent Coaching Institute at Seattle Pacific University. She has served as the president of the Virginia Academic and Applied Psychologist Academy of the Virginia Psychological Association and the Virginia Association for Psychological Science. Both our presenters are accomplished authors and publishers with accolades too numerous to mention here. Together, they co-authored Balancing the Big Stuff, Finding Happiness in Work, Family, and Life. Both Dr. Liss and Dr. Schiffrin were formative in my experiences as a student at Mary Washington and ultimately in my career as a psychologist. Dr. Liss was my academic advisor throughout my 4 years at Mary Washington, and it was in Dr. Schiffrin's statistics course that I fell in love with conducting psychological research. She later introduced me to the field of positive psychology in another class and then invited me to conduct independent research with her during my junior and senior years on topics related to positive psychology, the very topics that she and Dr. Liss will be speaking about tonight. I could go on and on about how their guidance and mentorship shaped my career and ultimately my life, but I think I'm supposed to keep my comments brief, so I'll spare you that trip down memory lane. Needless to say, I wouldn't be where I am now without either of their influence. It is now my honor to present tonight's guests as they present Let's Get Happy, the Science of Positive Psychology. Drs. Schiffrin and Liss, the floor is yours. Welcome to Mary Talks.
Hello, thank you so much, Katie. We are so thrilled to be here today and talk about something we can all use a lot more of, which is happiness. So my screen should be shared, so hopefully that is working. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to talk about positive psychology. So what is positive psychology? Well, it's a scientific approach to well-being that focuses on what makes us happy and truly flourish in our lives. It's opposed to a more typical scientific approach that focuses on mental illness and all the various ways that we can be miserable. Positive psychology as a movement officially got started in 1998 when Martin Seligman chose it as his theme for his American Psychological Association presidential address. But it builds on humanistic psychology and a lot of the work of Rogers and Maslow. But as a movement, positive psychology has truly flourished. It has its own conferences, its own journals. thousands of publications, its own textbooks, and its own courses. And Dr. Schiffrin teaches a course in positive psychology, and both she and I teach our freshman seminar on positive psychology. So in this talk, we're going to share some of the insights from this really important field, and hopefully give you some tips about how to increase some of the happiness in your life. So this is a particularly important topic right now because there's a lot of misery in a lot of people's lives. With the stress of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a lot of additional reasons for angst and misery. So any opportunity for happiness is really something we should all take advantage of. There has been indication that there really is truly a COVID stress syndrome that has a lot of different components, including getting fear of the illness or fear of contamination, including increased loneliness and social isolation, which really is a big problem because even before the COVID-19 pandemic, psychologists have been concerned about a loneliness epidemic in our country. Research has suggested that 37% of people before COVID reported feeling chronically lonely. One study found that 1 in 4 Americans before COVID had spoken to no one about something important to them in the past 6 months. So loneliness is a really big problem, and it's only being made worse. The risk of loneliness is worse for older adults living alone. And the US has about the highest rates of all countries of older adults living alone, 27%. So it's really a problem. And any of these techniques that we're going to talk about, some of them are going to focus on decreasing loneliness. Of course, there's been an increase in depression and anxiety and economic insecurity. And of course, there has been grief associated with the loss of loved ones due to COVID. So we need some happiness in our lives. So we're going to try to think about how these techniques of positive psychology can relate to some of these stresses of COVID. But just a few things that I want to just say on the outset about COVID is just to remember that, as is true of everything, this is temporary. We can't see the end yet, but it will eventually come. And also, this is something that humanity is stressed about all together. We might be lonely individually, but we're not lonely in our collective stress about COVID. We're kind of all in this together as a human species. So before we get started with the real kind of positive psychology research on happiness and well-being, I have to point out that the absolute foundation for well-being are the 3 things that you've probably known about your whole life. Your doctor keeps telling you, you got to remember these things, which is sleep well, physical activity, and to have a healthy diet, right? College students in particular, but as our new mothers, particular problems with sleep and getting regular sleep schedule. The COVID pandemic has really done a number on our sleep schedules, especially when we didn't have really a reason to get up in the morning. I know that's been the case in our family. Physical activity, it cannot be overstated, the positive benefits of physical activity. Exercise has been related to almost every positive thing you can think about. So in this time of COVID, maybe we aren't able to go to our gyms, but finding opportunities to be physically active is extremely important. And then diet. There's a huge amount of data linking the food that we put into our body to our well-being and happiness. So the basic kind of overarching things that you could take away from this talk are to try to keep a regular sleep schedule, try to get up at the same time every day as much as possible, stay active, get outside. In addition to physical activity being good for us, just being outside is good for us. So if we don't feel comfortable with indoor exercise, that's a great way to go, and try to find this time to improve your diet, to eat healthy, to experiment with new healthy foods. So those are probably things you already knew. For the rest of the talk, we're going to give you a little bit more of the specific science of positive psychology, and we're going to talk both about what does make us happy, but also what doesn't make us happy. So we're actually going to start with that. So a lot of people would say if you had a genie that could grant you anything you want in the entire world, what would you want? And you might say, I want to be rich. I want to move to California and be sunny. And you would be surprised to hear that some of those things would be considered circumstances and only in the 10%. And Dr. Schiffrin's going to talk more about those. But this kind of happiness pie was originally put forth by Sandra Libranersky, who I think was Dr. Nelson Coffey's academic advisor in graduate school, which is really exciting. And she said happiness is broken up into this pie, where circumstances, the aspects of our life, is only 10%. Intentional activities, which is the really important stuff that we can change, is 40%. And genetic set point is 50%, which might make us pessimistic. So our happiness, 50% of it is based in our genes. So what does that mean? Does that mean that being happier is as futile as being taller? Well, not really. Because what we really need to do is think about that genetic set point, kind of like we think of a thermostat. So thermostats set a range of heat in our house, right? We often will set that. So if it gets too hot, the AC goes on. If it gets too cold, the heat goes on. But there's a range of acceptable temperatures. Well, our genetic set point sets the range of acceptable happiness for us. So some people with a genetic gift of happiness may have a really high range where their lows aren't too low and their highs can be quite high. Other people might be born with a lower range where they really can fall into lower lows, but they still can get up there. So we have some limits on the amount we can change our happiness from our genes, but it's not that much limits. We can still have a lot of maneuverability within that genetic range. So genes are not everything, but there is a genetic predisposition to happiness that we need to be aware of. Okay. So I will turn things over to Dr. Schiffrin, who's going to explore more about circumstances.
So while we do have the genetic component that Dr. Liss mentioned, I'm going to talk next about this 10% slice of the pie, which is circumstances. And circumstances, as she mentioned, are the things that we think will affect our happiness a lot. And in fact, a lot of the circumstances that we think might affect our happiness don't that much. And even the ones that do, it's only about 10% of our overall happiness. So let me talk a little bit about what does and doesn't. So circumstances that do matter, your mental health and your physical health, they matter to some extent, maybe not as much as you think. Again, we're talking about that 10% of the pie. There are some mental health problems like depression that, specifically are countering being happy, but there are other mental health issues where you can coexist and have happiness at the same time. With your physical health, one of the things that matters more than your actual objective physical health is your perception of your health and whether it's limiting you or not. And so you can have two people who have the same chronic health condition, one of whom, it affects their happiness quite a bit, and another who doesn't because they just have a more maybe optimistic view and are able to adapt and still accomplish the things that they want in life. Another circumstance that matters some is the type of job that you do. And, jobs are places where people get the opportunity to have social relationships, which affect well-being, to work towards goals and accomplish goals that are going to make you feel good about yourself. So that is a component of happiness. Also education level, being more educated is associated with being more happier, but some of that works through your job, the job that you get. So that's part of that explanation. As I mentioned, relationships are really strongly related to your happiness. So if you are married and you have friends, you're happily married, I should say, because if you're in a high conflict marriage, that can damage your happiness. But having positive social relationships and being married are aspects that affect your happiness. And also there's some research that shows that having a religious faith, or at least spirituality, is associated with greater happiness. So these are some circumstances that do matter, but they matter in terms of that 10% only. But then there's lots of circumstances, like Miriam mentioned, if you were to wish on a genie, your 3 wishes, you might wish for money, you might wish for fame, you might wish for, your vacation on a tropical island. And lots of those things actually aren't even among the 10% that affect your happiness. Maybe you guys are older and wiser than the students that we teach who really struggle to believe that money is not going to be the answer to their happiness. But the research on money says You need enough, obviously. Living in poverty is associated with, if you don't have enough food, if you don't have adequate shelter, that's associated with decreased happiness. But once you kind of have enough where your needs are met, maybe a little extra for some leisure activities, more money doesn't benefit your happiness that much. A study that was done, it's getting dated now, but at that time, the number was around $75,000. Probably depends on the area you live in, probably depends on inflation now. It's like I said, it's a little dated, but it's not as much money as you might think to sort of cap out the increases in happiness. Things like where you live, living in tropical island or in a place with great weather, doesn't really matter that much. Whether you are, how smart you are, I have this, this picture of Einstein here, doesn't really, education matters, but your intelligence doesn't so much. And then other circumstances like your age, your maybe race or ethnicity or gender, those types of demographic variables really don't matter that much in terms of your happiness. So why not? Why don't these circumstances that we think would impact our happiness matter as much as we think that they should? So there's a couple of reasons for that. And one of them has to do with the fact that we are very adaptive as a human species. We get used to things and that helps us survive. So the good news is it helps us survive. We get used to negative things or we adapt in some way so we don't freeze to death. We develop clothing and shelters and things like that. But the bad news is we also kind of adapt and habituate to the good things in our life too. So if you move to an environment that has beautiful scenery and great weather, eventually you just adapt and habituate to it and you kind of get used to it and you no longer get the benefit that you get when you first moved there or if you went on onto vacation there. So that's one problem, that we're always going to be on this kind of what they call the hedonic treadmill, where as much as we get, as much as we gain, then we're going to get used to that and we're going to always want more. And so we'll have to keep walking on that treadmill. Another problem is that we have rising expectations. So as we habituate to things and adapt to them, we start to think, oh, well, we want something more. We want something better, right? So we move into a new house. And at first we feel happy about that, but then everyone else around us, it's kind of getting to social comparisons. Everyone else around us in our neighborhood has the same size house that we have. They have the same nice things that we have. And so we think, oh, well, maybe we want also a vacation home, or, I got a new car, but now that car's 2 or 3 years old and my neighbor's gotten a better car and there's newer cars out. And so they have newer features and better features. So I want whatever those new better things are, because I have these rising expectations to always do more, to gain more, to get better. And so that becomes part of the problem about why we don't appreciate these circumstances that we're in. We habituate to them and we always want more than what we have. Another thing is this idea of paradox of choice, which was introduced by a man named Barry Schwartz. And what he says is, people have this assumption that having more choices is going to make them happier. And to some extent, that's true. If you have no choice, you're told this is what you will wear, this is what you will buy, this is what you will eat, that does lead to unhappiness. So having some choice is good and associated with being happier. But the paradox is that having too much choice actually becomes overwhelming and decreases from your happiness. And, if you are going to, let's say, buy that new car, you can get on the internet and you can do days of research on all the different makes and all the different models and all their different features. And even if you narrow it down to one car, there's still multiple car dealerships that sell that car. And you can go to many car dealerships looking for the best deal and the best, everything that you could possibly get. And then you buy the car and the next weekend there's a sale on cars and now you're feeling regret because you didn't get that sale. You paid more than you should or something like that. So the more information we have, the more choices we have some sense of being overwhelmed by having all of that knowledge and information that takes away from our happiness. And then we also have these decision regret problems where we now find out that there's better options and we missed out on those options. And so that can impede our happiness. And then the last one, social comparison, I mentioned briefly already, but we do look around at the people around us and make comparisons of ourselves to them. And if we are constantly looking at people who have slightly more than we have, slightly better things than we have, that can really adversely affect our happiness. If in this world that we live in now, we also, it's not just looking around at our neighbors at what they have, we can kind of look around globally and see, you know, what is out there in the world and what are we missing out on? And to the extent that we're kind of comparing ourselves to people who are somewhat similar to us, but just have a little bit more, or have a little bit more success, or a little bit more material items, that can really undermine our happiness and make us unhappy with our circumstances, so that they're not contributing to this greater sense of well-being. Okay, and then the last thing I want to say here, I mentioned already that happiness is not really associated with having more and more money, as long as you kind of have enough. You guys, like I said, might be wiser than our students. Our students really struggle with this concept. They always think that having more money will make them happier. But there is some research that says there are ways that you can use money. So just the material purchases, that's not going to do it. You're going to habituate to those, and, you know, it's not going to benefit your happiness. But there are ways that you can use money effectively to increase your happiness. And one of the biggest ways that research has shown is to spend your money on other people, pro-social spending. So whether it's giving away to charity, or whether it's buying, you know, your friend a cup of coffee, or, you know, helping someone out in some way, those things boost your mood. But they also tend to, you know, especially if it's someone you know, like I said, buying friend coffee, it boosts their mood and also strengthens your relationship with them. And again, those relationships are really foundational to well-being. Another way that you can use money to increase happiness is by purchasing experiences rather than those material items. Because like I said, you're going to get used to the big house, you're going to get used to the new car, and then you're just going to want something better. But if you spend your money on experiences, going on vacations, taking trips, going to a show, even going to a restaurant and having a meal with friends or family, those things tend to have a greater impact on your well-being. And there's even some research that says that you are happier when you are planning your vacation and anticipating going on your vacation than you even are on your vacation, because you're looking forward to it so much and you are idealizing it, that everything is going to be wonderful and perfect, and that you really get a lot of benefit out of even the planning and anticipation part of your experiential purchase. And then the last thing I would say, when you are purchasing material items, to think about buying smaller items more frequently. So if you have $100 and you buy one $100 item, you know, yes, you will have an immediate burst of happiness from having that purchase. But then again, you're going to habituate, the novelty is going to wear off, and it will be over with. But if you took that same $100 and bought yourself 4 small purchases spread out, you know, once a week, you know, then you would get that little boost from having the purchase. It would last a little while, it would fade away, then you could purchase another small item, etc. And that is a way to sort of try to combat the tendency to habituate to these purchases. Okay, all right, so now I think Miriam's gonna take over talking about some intentional activities.
Okay, so we've talked about things you can't do too much about, right? We talked about our genetic set point, which, you know, we really can't do too much about after we're born. We talked about circumstances, which we certainly can work to change, but it's not going to buy us that much. And usually our circumstances, like moving to someplace else or getting a lot of money, are going to be pretty hard to change on a short-term basis. But 40% of our happiness is linked to these intentional activities that are super easy to change. A ton of research supports that doing these activities can really improve our happiness. So there are a lot of them, and hopefully they'll give you real concrete advice on things that you can do to increase your happiness. So Dr. Schiffrin helpfully organized these into a really cool kind of structure, thinking about how some of these activities are more cognitive, they're thinking, and some of these activities are more things that you actually have to do. And some of the activities are more focused on ourselves, and some of these activities are more focused on doing for other people or being with other people. So I'm going to talk about the self activities, and then I'm going to throw it back over to Dr. Schiffrin, and she's going to talk about the activities that are more focused on others. So let's start with this activity called the best possible self. This is a really interesting exercise that you can go home and do right now. And it's actually a writing exercise. So it goes like this. Imagine that one day, long after you've passed away, one of your great-grandchildren asks you about you and your life. Write about your life as you would like to have it related to your great-grandchild. Be sure to include a description of your values and characteristics. So it's about thinking about what is the life I want, who is the me I want to be, and how, and then writing about it, painting a picture to yourself in words or in pictures if you're more artistically inclined, of the you want to be. And the research on this is really impressive. It has shown to increase that sense of subjective well-being, happiness, even at the time of the intervention and then 3 weeks after. And even one research study found that people who did this intervention, and they didn't just do it once, they actually did it 4 times, but that's not that hard. They actually had decreased illness 5 full months later. So this is a really powerful intervention. I've tried it with my freshman seminar students, and it's always been pretty powerful and interesting. So I recommend that you go home and try it, write it in your journal. Think about, the life that you want to have lived and what it's going to look like, and as much detail as possible. And it is a really effective intervention to increase happiness. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about savoring. So savoring is a technique of happiness that actually has a lot of components, and we're actually going to do a little exercise associated with savoring. I think when you signed up for this talk, you were told to bring something delicious or yummy with you that we can savor together. So we're going to get to that at the end of this slide, but let me talk a little bit more about savoring. Savoring involves just enjoying something, and enjoying something that you usually kind of hurry through. So maybe that's eating a meal, taking a shower, even just the, walking outside, looking at the trees, especially in these beautiful fall days. And you can try that without, outside of this meet where you, really slow down and try to enjoy something that you usually rush through, and then think about how that felt. There's a lot of components to savoring. We can savor experiences by sharing them with other people. So that's a little bit about relating to others. And this is really powerful. If you say, tell somebody, let me tell you about the beautiful sunset that I saw, or let me show you this picture of this, beautiful vacation. You're building relationships and you're reliving wonderful experiences. It builds memories, and it builds positive memories. We tend so much to think about the negative things, but the more we focus our minds on the positive, beautiful things, the more we're rewiring our brain to think about the positive, beautiful things. So if we can try to build those memories of that beautiful sunset, the beautiful taste of that chocolate, the great conversation you had, that helps kind of rewire our brain to remember the good stuff. Self-congratulation is another component of savoring. So you should not be afraid of being proud of yourself. If you have worked on something and done something and it's gone well, tell yourself that you're proud of yourself. Tell your partner, how great you are. We'll talk more about how partners can respond to that later. And remember that when you've done something good, you deserve a little bit of self-congratulation. Savoring also involves, sharpening your sensory perceptions. A lot of savoring has to do with sharpening our senses and allowing us to be absorbed, not thinking, worrying. Often our minds are not with what we're doing. We're worrying about other things, and we're not truly absorbed in the moment. So with that, I thought we could try a savoring activity. I can't see you, but I hope that you brought something delicious to eat or drink. So let's take a minute. I brought a square of dark chocolate. I had to negotiate with my husband which chocolate I was allowed to remove from the house, but this one was acceptable. And so take whatever it is that you brought and break off, or I'm going to break off, but take a very, very small bit of it. All right. Not the whole thing. Don't shove it in our mouth. Sometimes I'm sure you've noticed that you often just eat mindlessly and it just goes in and you're like, oh, I ate that. But we're not going to do that when we savor. We're going to just, and if we're giving this talk live, I'd be passing out chocolate kisses to all of you. So I can't do that, but I can encourage you to do this. And what I want you to do is take the absolutely tiniest bite or sip of whatever it was delicious that you brought. So we're going to take a moment. I'm going to do this now. I'm a little nervous about this because I don't want to have chocolate on my teeth for the rest of this talk. So I'm going to take a really small bit and I'm going to put it in my mouth and roll it on your tongue, kind of swish it around in there, let it melt. Really just enjoy. You know, your tongue has all these different senses on the different parts of the tongue. So kind of swirl it around in there. And really, truly savor it. Really, I should have had you sniff it first, right? You can go back and for your second bite while I'm talking, give it this is a really beautiful smell of dark chocolate. So really you should smell it first and then take a tiny bite and truly savor it. I will let you continue savoring your delicious food as you listen to my talk, but I'm not gonna save the rest of my chocolate for when Dr. Schiffrin is talking for the rest of her talk. But this is something you can do every day, you know, with every meal. You can at least have one bite that you truly try to savor. But the more you can kind of savor your food, savor the views walking around. I think the fall is the perfect time for savoring because the leaves are starting to turn. You can look up at the trees and just take a minute, you know, and notice how beautiful it is. It's a really powerful intervention. Okay. Another powerful intervention is cultivating an optimistic explanatory style. So optimism is a mindset that's associated with a lot of really positive things. Increased health, increased achievement, athletic success. Athletes who are optimistic simply do better. Career success, optimistic salespeople sell more. So what does it mean to be optimistic? This explanatory style means that when we have a success, you've done well on a presentation, you made a sale, you can attribute that to things that are stable. So I did well this time, I'm probably gonna do well in the future. Things that are global. So I'm not just good at this presentation, I'm pretty good at my job, right? I'm good at a lot of things. And things that are internal. This went well because I worked hard on it. So if we can attribute our successes to these internal, global, stable things. And then when we have failures, it's better to attribute them to things that are temporary, right? Okay, I failed this time, but next time I'll do better. And specific, you know, maybe you didn't do well on this math test, or maybe, you know, this particular presentation didn't go well, but it was maybe due to that particular audience or something very specific to the situation. So it probably won't happen next time. And then it's also helpful to attribute those failures to external events, like, you know, my roommate was snoring, so I couldn't study as well as I could have. And when we make this type of explanatory style, we are set ourselves up to feel confident for success the next time. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds awful Pollyanna, and maybe, you know, we can't have too much optimism. And you're absolutely right. We really sometimes can have too much optimism. You don't want to have unrealistic optimism. You want your optimism to be realistic because there really are things that you can change and make better. And oftentimes you should take credit for your successes. And a lot of times our failures are really just temporary. But when we start to have unrealistic optimism, that's when we start to ignore high risk situations. We might say, oh, I don't need to wear that seatbelt. I'm not going to get in an accident, or I don't need to wear that mask because I'm going to be immune to COVID, right? We need to be realistic about risks and take appropriate precautions. So we don't want to be unrealistically optimistic, but being realistically optimistic and using these explanatory styles can be really helpful. The flip of this explanatory style, if you studied psychology, you've probably studied depression, and you know that people who are depressed actually take their successes to be temporary, specific, and external, and then take their failures to be stable, global, and internal. So if they do badly on the test, they'll say, I'll always do bad, I do bad at everything, and it's just me, I'm a loser, right? So that is not the way we want to be. We want to have this more optimistic explanatory style. So a quick kind of way of enhancing optimism is to use this ABCD model. So when something bad happens, an A, the adverse event, first we might have a belief like I'm a failure. That's your immediate thought. That's B, the beliefs. And the consequences of that, the C, the consequence is to feel bad. I feel terrible if I think that. So then D You dispute with yourself. You say, no, I'm not. Wait a minute. It's not my fault that this happened. X, Y, and Z extenuating circumstances happened. It was temporary. It was specific. And then that disputing that can kind of energize you, and it may lead you to feel better. That's classic cognitive behavioral therapy, and it can enhance our sense of optimism. Quickly, I want to talk about cultivating character strengths. This is a pretty interesting perspective on health and well-being, and Dr. Schiffrin is actually going to share with you a resource to help you do this. Character strengths are the things that we are good at. So often we focus on our weaknesses, what we're bad at, what we need to improve on, but really it can be extremely helpful to focus on what you are good on, what are your strengths. And researchers have classified strengths into these 6 overarching categories of wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence, which is kind of a spirituality. There's actually 24 strengths. So you can take this test. It's called the VIA, and it's free. And even my children have taken it. There's an adolescent version. And it will tell you what your strengths are. My top strength always ends up being zest, which is like energy and enthusiasm, which I think is funny. It's a subset category of courage. I feel like I don't have any courage, but I do have some enthusiasm. So I always score high. My family always makes fun of me for being high on zest. So you can find out what your strengths are. And then the idea is to use your strengths, find ways to use them in new and interesting ways, right? If you happen to score high on transcendence, then you should be thinking about enhancing your spiritual practice. If you score high on justice, think about how you can act towards justice. And this is a really effective technique to focus on what's great about us. Okay. Finally, I'm going to talk about mindfulness, because mindfulness is an extremely powerful technique that has been very strongly related to well-being. It involves focusing on the present moment, and you can enhance your level of mindfulness through having a formal meditation practice, or you can try to be mindful every day by trying to be more in the moment. But if we're going to have a formal meditation practice, would involve bringing awareness to the body, focusing on the breath, and just kind of focusing and putting your attention on your breath, which is very hard to do, because if you try it, you'll notice immediately your mind is going to start to wander, and you'll be like, oh my God, what am I going to make for dinner? And oh, what I have for my kids have their homework, and have I filled out all their school forms, and X, Y, and Z. And so the idea would be to just notice that your mind is wandering and then bring it back to your breath, and to have a sense of acceptance. Not be like, my mind is wandering, I'm a failure at meditation, but to say, okay, wow, my mind wandered, that's cool. Now I'll bring it back to my breath. And the data on mindfulness is so strong. I just recently saw a study published about a month ago that was linking mindfulness to decrease stress specifically related to COVID. So there is a lot of benefits to cultivating a mindfulness practice. But I want to talk about another technique that maybe you're less familiar with, which is a technique of what to do when we're trying to meditate or not trying to meditate, just living our life, and we get distressing and upsetting thoughts, okay? Because in the time of COVID, we are probably having some pretty distressing and upsetting thoughts, right? And so just kind of, and it can be hard when we're just meditating to know what to do with them. So this practice of RAIN involves 4 steps. So first, recognize, okay, I'm having these upsetting thoughts. I recognize that it's happening. That's okay. The second step is to allow it to be. This is about allowing the thoughts to be as they are and allowing life to be as it is. It is what it is. It's part of this idea of radical acceptance. And honestly, in this time of COVID, there's nothing else we can really do. We can't make COVID go away with a snap of our fingers. It is what it is. And that A step allows our thoughts to be as they are, and also kind of allows us to think about just accepting the reality of where we are. Then when we have those distressing thoughts, we can really investigate. We can be like, wow, when I think about this, when I worry about my grandma, when I'm worried about, going to the grocery store, or is my job secure? I can feel my heart clench. I can feel, my throat clench. And I can think about, what is this doing to my body? How is this thought affecting me? And then the end part is this interesting idea called non-identification. And this is kind of an idea that, we can have these thoughts, but just because we have these thoughts, and often our thoughts are worries about the future, which we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but our mind creates horrible stories about what's going to happen in the future. Just because we're having these thoughts, it doesn't mean that they're right, that they're true, that they're real. They're just thoughts, they're just words. We don't have to identify with them, okay? We can get a little separation, and that's the N part of RAIN. So Tara Brock is a psychologist. She works up in the DC, Baltimore area that really works with this idea of RAIN, and I think it's a pretty powerful approach. Okay, I think we're back to Dr. Schiffrin.
Yes. So Miriam walked you through some of the self-focused things, whether it's just thinking about things versus a behavioral thing that you do. And I'm going to walk you through similar activities for focusing on other people. So these are the other focused things that are more thoughts, the thought process rather than the doing. But counting your blessings is one intervention that does have research to suggest that this is associated with immediate benefits in your happiness, as well as some longer term benefits. There's been studies that has varied how often you count your blessings. And one of the things we talked about habituation already, you can habituate to these intentional activities. So you have to be careful about that. So if you kind of get into this habit of counting your blessings every day and you list off the same, 3 to 5 things every single day, you might habituate to that and stop getting the benefits from it. So, try to vary the things you're thankful for, maybe space it out and just try it once a week. But focusing on what you're thankful for in your life is one way. There's a second gratitude activity, which is the gratitude letter. And so this one can either be just a thought experiment where you write the letter and don't send it because it could be to someone, who is no longer with us, a grandparent who's passed away. Or you can take this gratitude letter where you're telling someone what you're really thankful for about them and how they've contributed to your life and made you feel you've learned from them or they've comforted you in some way. And you can actually send that letter to the person or read it to them over the phone. And that actually has really shown to be a very beneficial exercise for improving your well-being. And if you are able to actually give the letter to the person, then again, that person's mood gets improved, and then it strengthens that relationship between you and this other person, which has additional benefits for your well-being to have that relationship strengthened. Okay, another thing that's more of a thought process that's other focused is forgiveness. And so forgiveness, the first thing I want to say about forgiveness is it may or may not involve reconciliation. So forgiveness is a separate, distinct construct from making up with a person. Sometimes people have hurt you and it's not appropriate to make up and reconcile that relationship. Sometimes it is, and that's a different decision than forgiveness. Forgiveness is more of that internal thought process for yourself. And this is one model of forgiveness. There's more than one, but this is Enright's model. And step one of this model of forgiveness is to just uncover the negative sides of not forgiving, thinking about these negative feelings you're harboring, the damage that it's doing to you, the baggage you're carrying around, the anger, how it might be affecting your other relationships because you haven't forgiven someone. So just uncovering that and then making a decision to forgive. Lots of times we want to say, like, I want to wait until I'm, not having these negative feelings anymore, and then I will feel like forgiving them. But this approach says, you know what, you need to decide, maybe even when you're still upset or angry, it's a decision to forgive. But then there's work that goes into that. You may decide today that you plan to forgive and let go of those angry feelings, but a week from now, you might hear something or see the person and all those feelings come back up again. So it's something you have to work at. And one of the ways that you might work at is thinking about times that you've done something where you need to be forgiven, where someone has forgiven you and how that made you feel, trying to take the other person's perspective and have empathy for them, but it's a process. It's a decision that you make and a process that you have to work on. And then the last step in this model is deepening. And that's the idea of trying to really identify the meaning from what you went through. What did you learn? How did you grow? Like, yes, that person might have hurt you, or that experience might have been very upsetting, but did you learn anything from it? could you be a better person? Could you be a better friend or a better partner in a relationship from having gone through that experience? And so trying to find the meaning in it is part of the forgiveness process. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to transition into more of the doing aspect of it, where that's other focused. And so one of the things that's a lot of research on the benefits of volunteering. Volunteering and helping other people can benefit your happiness in a couple of ways. One thing, going back to the idea of social comparisons, it gives you a very different group of people to compare yourself to. It's often helping people that are less well off than you, and that can give you a sense of gratitude for the things that you do have in your life, things that you may have habituated to and stop being thankful for. All of a sudden you can realize, like, gosh, not everybody has what I have, and I really should be grateful for that. Another thing that it can do is break a rumination cycle. So if you are feeling, negative thoughts or feeling down about something and you're just obsessed with it, focusing on it, then taking that break to focus on someone else and to help someone else can really break that cycle and can help benefit your well-being that way. In addition to, maybe a more formal way of volunteering, there's also research on random acts of kindness where you just do things to help other people. And it can be simple little things like holding a door for someone. It can be the pay it forward kind of things where you buy, the Starbucks for the person behind you in line. Just lots of little things that you can do to help others in small ways, and that does benefit your well-being as well. And again, you have to be careful about the habituation piece. If you think every day I'm going to open the door for everyone I see, eventually you'll get used to it. You'll stop getting the little happiness boost from doing that. So you do need to introduce, novelty and variety and try to help people out in different ways in order to continue receiving that benefit. Okay. And then active constructive responding, this goes back to when Miriam was talking about savoring and how you could self-congratulate. This has to do with how you respond to the good news of important, friends and family in your life. And so there are different ways you can respond. You can respond in a more negative way. So if somebody comes in, your spouse comes in and says, oh, I got a promotion at work, a negative response would be, oh, great, now you're going to be working all the time and you're not going to have any time for me. And I'm going to have more responsibility in the house because, of your promotion. That would be a negative response. You could have a more passive response where just like, dinner's ready, let's sit down and eat or something. But this active constructive responding is when you really take the time to celebrate the other person's success and you ask them questions and you congratulate them and you celebrate, like, let's go out to dinner and celebrate this, or, look, I want to call, someone else and tell them your great news. I'm going to call your mom and tell them, that you had this great news because they want to know too. And just really responding in a way that lets them know you listened and that you support them and that you're happy for them. And again, that type of response is really shown to strengthen relationships among people. And those positive, strong relationships are really beneficial to your well-being. Okay, so this is the last slide I guess there's one more after this, but the last point I want to make is just this idea. We've shown you lots of activities that you can do to increase your well-being, but it's not like you can just do these things one time and then you're going to be happier and that's it. You never have to do anything else again. It's more like, a weight loss analogy. If you're going to eat right and you're going to exercise and that's going to result in weight loss, as long as you're eating right and exercising, that continues. But, if you stop exercising and if you start eating desserts again and, going to get fast food, you're going to see all the benefits of weight loss and toning and muscle toning that you had from the good diet and exercise is going to go away. So in order to maintain that physical state of fitness that you want, you have to continue to exercise and eat healthy. And so we see a similar thing with happiness, back to maybe a thermostat analogy that Dr. Liss shared at the beginning. If you do these intentional activities, you can get to the upper point of your set range. If you stop doing them, you're probably going to start coming back down to the lower end of your set range. And so it does require this intentional effort and variety in what you're doing in order to maintain those increases in happiness. Okay, and then this is the last slide, which is just, thinking about happiness not being based on the circumstances you're in, but on the decisions that you make. And during this time of COVID, that might be a particularly comforting message, right? Our circumstances are challenging right now, but we can make decisions and do intentional activities that, you know, strengthen our relationships and improve our happiness. I think now we are opening things up for Q&A.
Yes, thank you. We have a number of questions, and I'm going to be reading them out. The top question is an anonymous attendee who is wondering about your thoughts regarding the relationship between habit formation and happiness, especially development of the habits in order to reduce the friction of decision-making in our everyday lives. And then a thank you for presenting.
So, Sonia Livermirsky has written about this some, and one of the things she says is you want it to make it a habit to do the activities so that you don't have to think about, just like it's a habit to brush your teeth in the morning, you don't think about it, you don't use that mental energy, am I going to brush them, am I not going to brush them, you know, it's a habit, you do it, but whatever you're doing needs to have that novelty and variety that I was talking about, or else you'll stop getting, you know, the benefits. So if you're going to use your strengths, make it a habit to use your strength, but vary which strength you're using, or vary how you're using. If you have zest as your strength, you know, don't just do the same thing. You have to mix it up and keep it novel.
Okay. Courtney Lynn asks, I'm so happy to see both of you. I'm wondering what the research is like on positive psychology principles with diverse populations. It's hard to tell someone to be grateful when they are being teased at school for being in the LGBTQ community, or when you're worrying about putting food on the table and staying safe in your neighborhood. I know the principles are always great, but I feel like sometimes it's a privilege.
I think that's an outstanding point. You know, I think for people with less privileged social identities, they're going to have more challenging circumstances. They're going to have real events, you know, harassment, traumas, lack of ability to, you know, put food on the table, or, you know, real things happen to them, right? But these techniques are still valid. I think that, you know, yes, you can't do the same. You can't say, oh, go savor your ski trip if you don't have the financial resources to do something like that. There's certainly aspects of these that can be differentially applied for people with more resources. But even in tough situations, right, we can savor the, you know, savor a sunset, savor a relationship that we have with other people. We can be grateful for something that has gone well, right? So I think we have to realize that the context and the experiences and the circumstances that people have, you know, are going to vary tremendously. And some people are, you know, very much going to have more adverse experiences than others. So we can't just say, oh, well, snap your fingers and it'll work. Like sometimes we really do need to work to change circumstances. Sometimes we need to work to create LGBTQ supportive environments in our schools and in our businesses to decrease harassment. Right? Sometimes we really need to work on those circumstances. But from an individual perspective, none of these techniques are things that are only available to the privileged. I don't know if other people have things to chime in on that.
Okay. Next question is from alumna Liz Button. Actually, I shouldn't assume alum. It could be a community member. I'm currently developing a positive psychology curriculum for my university. I was wondering if you guys have some suggestions for good materials, especially a textbook for undergrads. Thanks for doing this. It's a nice break from writing my dissertation.
If you want to, you could send an email and I'd be happy to share my syllabus and everything with you. So, do they have our contact information, Jeremy?
I can share that. I can share that tomorrow.
Yeah, I would be happy to send you any of the resources that I have. So.
Do that. Okay. Our next question is, any chance this presentation is recorded so I can watch again and refer back to certain parts? Yes. In the email I send the next morning, I include the link to watch this. It'll be on our YouTube channel for you to watch after the fact, along with the full catalog of Mary Talks. Great question. Next question is, do you have any techniques for increasing happiness for those with anxiety disorders?
I mean, so I think the premise of positive psychology is that these same techniques are going to work whether you are, have a diagnosis or not. So there's actually a whole field called positive psychotherapy where they have used some of these very same interventions in populations that have anxiety and depression and show that they benefit from them just like people who don't have a diagnosis benefit from them. So I don't know. Do you guys want
Yeah,
to?
and I'll just add, I mean, I know some of the techniques like RAIN is specifically for people who are experiencing distress and anxious emotions. Within the field of kind of increasing distress tolerance and working with people with anxiety disorders, there's a lot of focusing on sensory aspects, like having something to smell or something to hold, right? Which is really part of savoring, right? Focusing on the senses to take the focus out of the ruminating, crazy thoughts that can drive anxiety.
And I know Miriam mentioned this before, but the ABCDE, model of learned optimism, Seligman actually developed that model within the context, a therapeutic context, treating depression. And then what he realized is that that would also help people who aren't depressed to promote optimism. So.
Okay. Question from Deborah Hyman Hughes. I'm a 1973 Mary Washington College graduate. Any comments about how to age gracefully?
The interesting thing about the research on age is that there's this real misconception, a real myth that people get less happy as they get older. And that is not the case at all. And in fact, it's exactly opposite of what you think. Like we think of teenage angst and teens being very unhappy. And then we think of older people being like, oh, well, they can't do all the things they used to do. They must be unhappy. And if you look at the curve, it's exactly the opposite. Like teens and old, it's a small difference, but still teens and older people are higher. The bottom is actually the age I am right now. So I'm looking forward to the upswing coming. But yeah, I mean, the research does not bear that out. And one of the things that, and it's correlation. So, correlation doesn't equal causation. You have to be careful, but that happier people live longer. And so the older you are, the happier people kind of are. And maybe some of that's because if you were unhappy, you passed away. I don't know, but some of it is, I think, having that appreciation for life, that you gain wisdom as you get older. And maybe as you've seen a friend or a family member pass away, you realize you need to kind of cherish life more and savor more and focus on your relationships more.
Yeah, I just want to add the focus on relationships, I think, is one of the key points to aging well. I mean, the research so clearly shows that the people who are happier and live longer are people who have cultivated any kind of relationship, friendships, family relationships, and are involved and engaged in aspects of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about research linking pets and happiness? This person says it has certainly improved their happiness in their household. Can anyone talk about that?
I mean, there is absolutely research on that, and the oxytocin that gets released when you like pet your dog or love on your pet, that you get that same type of oxytocin release that you do, the cuddle hormone when you're cuddling with a human being. I don't go deep in that area, but I know it exists in other.
And I think adoptions have been way up with COVID, and I think that's a great coping mechanism. And I think I haven't actually seen the research on pets in the context of COVID. But I'm sure that the people who adopted during COVID have coped better. So I know the research has shown having pets, and except for that first year of puppyhood where you're never sleeping, right? Then then it can maybe decrease your happiness. But there's a lot of good research there.
Sure. I think the last question we have is any books in general, not textbook, but just books that you would recommend in regard to happiness.
So, I mean, it kind of depends on which topic you're more interested in. Seligman has written a book called Learned Optimism. So if that's an area you really want to work on, Barry Schwartz has written a book called The Paradox of Choice. He came and spoke at Mary Washington years ago, and it literally changed my life. I mean, his whole research on how you should make choices in a way that is going to benefit your happiness and not to get overwhelmed with all the information in the research, definitely had a huge impact on me. Sonia Lyubomirsky, who is Katie's advisor in graduate school, has written several books like The How of Happiness, and what's her more recent one? Katie, do you want to? she wrote The Myths, right? The one.
Yeah, The Myths of Happiness, which I loved. I thought it was really interesting because it's all about kind of just challenging these myths that you think you're going to be happy when you get married or when X, Y, or Z happens. And it talks about why that may or may not be the case.
Right.
I love the How of Happiness. I find, even though it's an older one, I assign it for my son, and they really get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll get some of these in writing and I'll include it in my follow-up email too, along with the email info.
Also balancing the big stuff.
Oh, of course. Great. Thanks for the plug, Katie. So balancing the big stuff goes beyond just the positive psychology. It talks about work and family life. And there are chapters on the positive psychology end of it specifically, but it is a broader focus, but yes.
Sure. Let's keep going on. We have a few more. They asked about the titles of the books, sending the links. If most of our propensity is hardwired and children are still being wired during their youth, can you train them to be more optimistic? Ooh.
I think that Seligman would say that you can, and that they do interventions in elementary schools to help, teach the children this learned optimism approach, and are following them long term and seeing benefits of that. I know Carol Dweck does some research and on mindset and how, doing interventions with children in elementary school to teach them that they should have a growth mindset, that I'm not doing well because I'm smart. I'm doing well because I worked hard and I put in a lot of effort, and that can help promote this lifelong learning and, being able to face challenges and persist in the face of difficulty. So definitely they are doing those types of interventions.
I'll also add, there's been an increasing focus on mindfulness interventions in the schools. So I have right here a curriculum called Mindful Schools that I'm going to be working on with my research team, as long as COVID allows, to help implement a mindfulness intervention to a group of an entire first grade in Spotsylvania County schools. And the research on some of these mindfulness interventions seems to really show that they kind of help with these kids' well-being too. And the fixed and flexible, I'm seeing that through all the Spotsylvania County schools are kind of doing a lot of mindset interventions in the school setting.
Okay. The last question is actually a comment, and it says, thank you for this presentation, which leads to the conclusion of our talk. Thank yous to Drs. Liss and Schiffrin for joining us this evening, and for Katie for your expertise and for introducing them. I'd also like to thank Mark Simpkins from Events AV, who helped facilitate the virtual logistics of tonight's program. And thanks again to all of our viewers at home for joining us tonight and being a part of the conversation. As a quick reminder, this presentation will be available for viewing on the UMW YouTube channel starting tomorrow. There you can watch this program and browse the full catalog of Mary Talks. I will send out an email tomorrow with all the things we've talked about tonight, in addition to a link to that video. Our 5th season of Mary Talks continues on Wednesday, December 9th, with Doctors Sabrina Johnson and Juliet Landfair, co-chairs of the Farmer Legacy Celebration, who will present the James Farmer Legacy 2020 and beyond. We look forward to seeing you then, if not earlier. Thank you and good night. Thanks, guys.